What if I told you that in the 15th century, one of history's greatest military powers wasn't in Europe or Asia, but in West Africa? An empire with a professional armored army, a powerful river navy, and a king who reportedly never lost a single war. This was the Songhai Empire, a superpower of astonishing wealth and brilliance that, for a time, seemed truly invincible. It's a story of legendary warrior kings, but also of how even the mightiest can be brought down by a new technology that changes the rules of war forever. So how did this incredible empire rise, and what was the weapon that sealed its fate? And before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed. We uncover forgotten empires and legendary figures every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Long before the Songhai Empire was a name to be feared, its story began humbly, tied to the lifeblood of West Africa, the Niger River. For centuries, the Songhai people, fishermen, farmers, and traders, lived along the river's great bend. The water was their highway, their grocery store, and their first line of defense. Their capital, Gao, started as a small kingdom around the 10th century and grew into a busy hub of commerce. But for a long time, it lived in the shadow of a greater power. To the west lay the colossal Mali Empire, famous for its emperor, Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage to Mecca dropped so much gold on Cairo that it wrecked the city's economy for a decade. For a while, Gao and the Songhai people were subjects of Mali, paying taxes and tribute. But as the 14th century wore on, the Mali Empire started to crack. Royal disputes, rebellions, and the sheer difficulty of ruling such a vast territory weakened its grip. The Songhai saw their chance. From their strategic position on the Niger, they controlled a vital trade artery. In the early 1400s, they began to push back, raiding Malian cities and reclaiming their autonomy. By the 1430s, they had formally broken away under a new line of rulers, the Sunni dynasty. But they were just one of several states fighting for a piece of the crumbling Mali Empire. They were strong, but not yet a superpower. That all changed with the arrival of one man. A man whose name would become synonymous with conquest and relentless force. A prince who, after being held as a political prisoner by Mali, would escape, seize power, and transform his kingdom into a conquering force unlike anything West Africa had ever seen. His name was Sunni Ali, and with him, the age of the Songhai Empire truly began. He would become one of the most feared kings in history, a man who fought 32 wars and never lost. But how did he do it? Let's find out. When Sunni Ali took the throne in 1464, the game changed. He wasn't a king who was content to just rule. He was a commander born to conquer. He had a brilliant military mind, a taste for ruthless tactics, and boundless ambition. The chronicles of the time, like the Tariq al-Sudan, claim that in 28 years, he fought 32 wars and won every single one. He was always the conqueror, never the conquered. Sunni Ali's genius was his revolutionary approach to war. He ditched the sporadic raids of his ancestors and launched a campaign of systematic expansion. His strategy rested on two pillars, a powerful cavalry, and crucially, a formidable river navy. The Niger River wasn't just a trade route anymore, it was a highway for his army. He built a fleet of war canoes, which he used to move troops with a speed and stealth his enemies just couldn't match. His first big target was the legendary city of Timbuktu. The city had fallen under the control of the Tuareg nomads, and in 1468, its leaders asked for help. Sunni Ali answered the call. He swept in, drove out the Tuareg, and absorbed the city into his growing empire. His victory, however, was brutal. He cracked down on the city's Islamic scholars, who he saw as allies of the Tuareg. This earned him a reputation among some chroniclers as a cruel and impious tyrant. But Sunni Ali was a pragmatist. While nominally a Muslim, he was deeply rooted in traditional African animist beliefs. He cultivated an image as a powerful magician, which terrified his opponents and inspired his soldiers. This dual identity allowed him to appeal to both the Muslim elites in the cities and the rural populations who followed traditional faiths. His next prize was Djenné, another fabulously wealthy trading hub that had famously survived 99 sieges by the Mali Empire. Sunni Ali was more patient. He besieged the city for 7 long years, slowly starving it out until it finally surrendered in 1473. With Timbuktu and Djenné under his control, he held the two most important commercial and intellectual centers in the region, and all the wealth that flowed through them. Sunni Ali's methods were a mix of ferocity and practicality. He could be merciless, but he also integrated conquered warriors into his own army, swelling his ranks with the very men he had just defeated. He expanded in every direction, fighting off the Mossi kingdom to the south and overwhelming the Dogon people to the north. By the time he died in 1492, drowning while crossing a river on yet another campaign, Sunni Ali had forged a vast multi-ethnic empire. He was the architect, but the man who followed would take this raw creation and polish it into a jewel. A ruler so great they called him Caliph of the Sudan. Sunni Ali's death in 1492 left a power vacuum. His son, Sunni Baru, took over but lacked his father's political skill and, crucially, the support of the empire's powerful Muslim elite. When Baru refused to declare himself a devout Muslim, a general named Muhammad Toure used it as an excuse to challenge him. In 1493, their armies clashed. Muhammad Toure won, ousted the heir, and started a new dynasty, the Askia dynasty. He became Askia Muhammad, better known as Askia the Great. If Sunni Ali was the conqueror, Askia Muhammad was the organizer. He was the visionary who would guide Songhai to its absolute peak. He was also a brilliant commander who expanded the empire to its largest extent, stretching over 1.4 million square kilometers from the Atlantic coast into modern-day Nigeria and Niger. But his real genius was in governance. He knew an empire built only on force is fragile. To last, it needed structure and a unifying idea. Askia Muhammad's biggest move was making Islam the official religion of the state. He was a devout Muslim, and unlike Sunni Ali's blended approach, Askia embraced Islamic law and appointed Muslim judges. This didn't mean forcing everyone to convert. Traditional beliefs were still common in the countryside. But at the state level, Islam became the glue that held the diverse empire together. His support turned Timbuktu and Janneh into world-renowned centers of Islamic learning, with universities like Sankore attracting scholars from across the globe. To manage his huge domain, Askia created an incredibly efficient bureaucracy. He divided the empire into provinces, each with a governor he appointed. He created a council of ministers for finance, justice, agriculture, and even one to manage relations with northern nomadic groups. He also professionalized the military, creating a full-time standing army separate from the civilian population. This meant better training, discipline, and readiness. The economy was central to his vision. He standardized weights, measures, and currency, which made trade easier and more profitable. He built canals to boost agriculture, which fed his growing cities and armies. Under his rule, the trans-Saharan trade in gold, salt, and other goods boomed, flooding the treasury with wealth. In 1496, Askia made his own grand pilgrimage to Mecca. He returned with spiritual prestige and, according to some traditions, the title Caliph of the Sudan, supposedly granted by the ruler of Egypt, which would have recognized him as the leader of all Muslims in West Africa. While historians debate the formal granting of this title, the claim itself significantly boosted his authority. For 35 years, Askia the Great presided over Songhai's golden age. He had brought order, faith, and structure to the empire Sunni Ali had built. The empire wasn't just a military superpower, it was a commercial giant and an intellectual beacon. But as Askia grew old, his grip on power began to slip, and the ambitions of his many sons began to rise. If you were in his shoes, would you trust multiple heirs to share power, or pass it all to one? Let me know in the comments. The Songhai army was the reason the empire was a superpower. Under Sunni Ali and Askia the Great, it became a professional, multi-layered military machine that was, for over a century, the dominant force in the region. At its heart was a large, standing professional army. At its peak, the military had an estimated 30,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, making it the largest organized force in the area. The most feared part of this army was its elite cavalry. Think of them as the knights of West Africa. Drawn from the nobility, these horsemen were protected by quilted padded armor, and the wealthiest nobles sported iron helmets and breastplates. This cavalry acted as a shock force, capable of shattering enemy lines with a single, thundering charge. Supporting the cavalry was a huge infantry. These weren't just farmers with spears. They were well-equipped soldiers armed with long spears, powerful bows, and swords for close combat. They were protected by large leather shields and coordinated their movements on the battlefield with trumpets and drums. But the Songhai's real trump card was its navy. The empire was built along the Niger River, and Sunni Ali had militarized this natural highway. He created a massive fleet of war canoes, some big enough to carry dozens of soldiers. This river force gave the Songhai incredible mobility. They could move troops faster than any enemy could march, launch surprise attacks, and control the vital trade flowing along the water. While their enemies were stuck on land, the Songhai army could appear as if from nowhere. The command structure was clear and effective. The emperor, the Askia, was the commander-in-chief, supported by a minister of defense and generals who led armies in the field. This ensured orders were carried out efficiently across the vast empire. For over a century, this military system proved dominant. It conquered what was left of the Mali Empire, subdued rival kingdoms, and defended a vast territory. It was a machine perfectly built for the geography of West Africa, and it had mastered it completely. But it was a machine built to fight with swords and spears. It was totally unprepared for the revolution that was coming from across the desert, a revolution powered by gunpowder. It was a machine perfectly built for the geography of West Africa, and it had mastered it completely. But it was a machine built to fight with swords and spears. And across the desert, an enemy was marching with weapons that could kill an empire. An army, no matter how strong, needs to be paid for. The Songhai superpower ran on the engine of the trans-Saharan trade. This ancient network of caravan routes connected the gold fields of West Africa with the salt mines of the Sahara and the markets of North Africa and Europe. The heart of this trade was a simple exchange: gold for salt. West Africa had the gold which the rest of the world craved. But in the hot climate of the Sahel, salt was just as precious. It was the only way to preserve food and was a vital resource for armies on the march. The 16th century traveler Leo Africanus wrote that in Timbuktu, salt was so valuable it was traded for nearly its weight in gold. The Songhai Empire conquered the key cities of this trade network, Timbuktu and Jenne, and seized control of the crucial Saharan salt mines at Tagaza. This gave them a near monopoly on the most profitable trade in the world at the time. The empire didn't just control the trade, it organized and protected it. Askia Muhammad's reforms fostered trust and efficiency. His professional army patrolled the routes, making the dangerous journey across the desert safer for merchants who paid taxes for the protection. This created a perfect cycle. Trade brought wealth, which funded the army, which protected the trade. This economic power fueled a vibrant cultural and intellectual life. Timbuktu became the jewel of the empire, a legendary city of scholars, poets, and architects. Its universities, especially the University of Sankore, were world-class centers of learning. Books on law, science, and mathematics were prized commodities, and the city's astronomers were among the best anywhere. The empire's culture was a unique blend. The urban elites embraced Islam, which connected them to the wider world. But in the countryside, most people continued to practice traditional West African religions. The emperors managed this diversity skillfully. This mix of African and Islamic traditions created a distinct Songhai identity that held the massive empire together. It wasn't just feared for its army. It was respected for its wealth, justice, and wisdom. It was a complete civilization. But even at its brightest moment, cracks were starting to show. It wasn't just feared for its army. It was respected for its wealth, justice, and wisdom. But wealth breeds ambition, and ambition breeds betrayal. Betrayal that would tear Songhai apart from within. The Askia dynasty's greatest strength, a powerful, central monarchy, was also its greatest weakness: succession. Askia the Great had a long, successful reign, but he also had countless sons, each with an eye on the throne. In 1528, as the old emperor became blind, that tension exploded. His own sons overthrew him, putting one of their brothers, Askia Musa, in power. This betrayal kicked off the beginning of the end. Askia Musa's reign was short and brutal. Paranoid about conspiracies, he executed many of his own brothers and key officials. He didn't last long. In 1531, he was overthrown and killed, plunging the empire into a vicious cycle of chaos. For the next 50 years, the throne of Songhai was a bloody prize, fought over by Askia's sons and grandsons. Rulers came and went, usually through assassination or rebellion. This constant infighting brought the central government to a grinding halt. Provincial governors started acting like kings of their own little territories, withholding taxes and ignoring the capital. The unified empire began to fracture. A brief moment of stability returned under Askia Daoud, who ruled from 1549 to 1582. But when he died, the old demons returned with a vengeance. A brutal civil war erupted between his sons, tearing the empire apart. The professional army, once a unified force, was now fighting itself in the streets of the capital. This weakness did not go unnoticed. To the north, the Saadi dynasty of Morocco was watching. Its ambitious sultan, Ahmad al-Mansur, had his own dreams of empire. He had recently defeated a Portuguese invasion, but the victory left him broke. He looked south and saw not a mighty superpower, but a fractured, war-torn empire ripe for the picking. He craved control of the trans-Saharan trade, especially its salt mines and legendary gold. The civil wars had left Songhai internally broken. The formidable military was weakened and divided. The empire was a giant, but it was a giant on its knees. And now, an enemy was marching from across the desert, armed with a technology that would make Songhai's army obsolete. The final blow was about to fall. The empire was a giant on its knees, and now an enemy was marching from across the desert armed with a technology that would change the very nature of war. This is where you'll want to stay locked in, because the battle that followed is one of the most shocking in African history. In late 1590, Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur of Morocco made his move. He sent an army of a few thousand men south across the Sahara. The force was small, but it had a decisive advantage. It was equipped with arquebuses, an early musket, and several cannons. It was a gunpowder army. After a grueling 4-month march, the Moroccan force, led by a general named Judar Pasha, arrived in Songhai territory in early 1591. The emperor, Askia Ishak II, gathered his army. On paper, the Songhai were far superior, with around 40,000 soldiers outnumbering the Moroccans 10-1. But they were an army of iron and muscle about to face an army of fire and lead. The two armies met on March 13, 1591, at the Battle of Tondibi. Askia Ishak II knew about firearms and came up with a creative, desperate plan. He would drive a massive herd of 1,000 cattle ahead of his army. He hoped the stampede would either break the Moroccan lines or kick up enough dust to cover his warriors as they charged into close combat, where their numbers would win the day. It was a brilliant gamble, and it backfired spectacularly. As the cattle charged, Judar Pasha ordered his men to fire. The sound of the cannons and muskets was a deafening thunderclap, unlike anything ever heard on a Sahelian battlefield. The noise and fire terrified the cattle. Instead of stampeding forward, they turned and ran backward, directly into the charging Songhai army. The attack collapsed into chaos. Songhai soldiers were trampled by their own cattle as the Moroccans calmly reloaded and fired another volley into the disorganized mess. The elite Songhai cavalry, the pride of the empire, was useless. Their armor couldn't stop a bullet, and their horses were terrified by the noise. The Songhai fought with incredible courage, but their swords and spears were no match for guns. The battle turned into a massacre. The once dominant army broke and fled. The Battle of Tondibi was a catastrophe. The Songhai army was shattered. Judar Pasha marched unopposed into the capital, Gao, and then Timbuktu and Jenne, looting them all. Though a guerrilla resistance fought on for years, the Songhai Empire as a unified state was finished. The Moroccans had won the battle, but they soon learned that conquering and ruling were two very different things. The age of knights and cavalry in West Africa was over. The age of gunpowder had begun. The Battle of Tondibi was a catastrophe. The Songhai army was shattered. The knights of West Africa had met their match in the fire of gunpowder. Do you think sheer numbers could ever overcome gunpowder? Or was this battle proof that technology always wins? Tell me below. The fall of the Songhai Empire in 1591 wasn't just the end of a dynasty. It was the end of an era. For nearly 1,000 years, from ancient Ghana to Mali and finally Songhai, the Western Sahel had been home to great, wealthy empires. Songhai was the last and, in many ways, the greatest. Its collapse left a power vacuum, and the region fragmented into smaller, weaker states, though some of these successor states held on to significant local power for decades. The Moroccan victory was ultimately a hollow one. They shattered an empire they couldn't rule. The trade routes they had come to control fell into chaos and eventually declined as European ships began trading along the African coast. But the legacy of Songhai endures. It's a powerful testament to a period of incredible African achievement. Its advanced government, professional military, and vibrant intellectual culture paint a picture of a sophisticated civilization on par with any of its contemporaries. The story of Sunni Ali and Askia the Great is one of masterful strategy, governance, and innovation. In an age when Europe was just beginning its global expansion, the Songhai Empire was a center of power in its own right. Its fall at Tondibi was a brutal lesson in how technology can topple even the mightiest powers. But the memory of the armored horsemen, the river navy, and the brilliant scholars of Timbuktu remains. The Songhai Empire was Africa's superpower, a dominant army that finally met an unbeatable weapon, leaving behind a legacy of power, brilliance, and a history that deserves to be remembered. The Songhai Empire was Africa's superpower, a dominant army that finally met an unbeatable weapon, leaving behind a legacy of brilliance and a history that deserves to be remembered. If this story gripped you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe now and explore more hidden empires and forbidden histories. Check out our video on Hannibal, the African general who made Rome bleed, and Mansa Musa, the man so rich he crashed economies. History isn't just what you're taught in school. Here on Silent Dynasties, we uncover the truth. Stay with us, because the next story might just change how you see the world.